This looks like progress. It's actually a sign of desperation in Utuado, one of the areas hit hardest by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico.
He says they're repairing the power themselves because they're almost at 9 months without power and they feel abandoned.
Charlie Reyes has no experience doing this, climbing poles, working with live wires, restoring power, something he says he learned in one day from a retired power worker. Using any materials they can find, their risky mission has turned the lights back on for more than a dozen. The home of Samuel Vasquez is next.
It's like I feel bad because it's just, you can't get no power. You ain't get no light.
In Utuado, tarps are still being used, roads washed out, emergency plans are still being worked out. Mayor Ernesto Irizarry says his municipality cannot take another storm.
So how frustrating is that as the leader of 30,000 people in Utuado?
It's difficult and hard because you see in the eyes the people, the frustration.
He says he doesn't have the basic resources or the money to respond to a natural disaster. 8 months after Maria, parts of the island are still dealing with what FEMA calls the longest power outage in modern U.S. history. More than 10,000 customers are still in the dark.
Can this power grid, can it sustain itself if another hurricane were to come?
The most honest thing to say about our grid is that it's weak or fragile.
Walt Higgins is the new CEO for Puerto Rico's Power Authority, tasked with fixing a power grid never built to handle Cat 4 or 5 hurricanes. Just weeks ago, an island-wide blackout was caused by a fallen tree. Higgins promises most of those still without power, though not all, will have it restored in a matter of weeks. What he cannot say is what will happen if another storm plunges the island into darkness.
My straight answer to that is we are readier this year than we were last year.
And people on the island will be counting on it for their very lives. A Harvard study now indicates a lack of power after Maria is partly to blame for more than 4,600 deaths, far more than Puerto Rico's official death toll of 64.
Will this be enough?
Yes.
For FEMA's part, it's showing off this warehouse full of disaster relief supplies. The plan for the next disaster compared to Maria preparations to have 7 times more water and meals, 6 times more generators, 8 times more tarps, all on the island before the next hurricane. The agency admits it's learned some lessons.
So will FEMA be ready for a faster response if a hurricane
Absolutely,
hits?
there's no doubt, no doubt.
But for those in Utuado taking matters into their own hands, any sign of recovery is a victory.
You get a little emotional about it.
Oh, yeah. Whew, do you know how long did I don't see the light on my house? 9 months. Been 9 months.
And now another hurricane could be around the corner for the next season.
Yes. I guess I got to do it again. By hand again with the people.
The hope here is that power returns before the next storm.
All right, joining us now is Puerto Rico's Governor, Ricardo Rosselló. Governor, thank you so much for being here. I mean, Leyla just lays it out in such stark terms in her piece there. These numbers are staggering. Let's start with the discrepancy about the death toll, okay? So as you know, the Harvard study that has come out this week, it's staggering. 4,645 people, they say, were killed. The official number is 64. How can the official tally be so different?
Well, good morning, and thank you again for the opportunity. Reason is that we used a very limited protocol once the storm came about. It was a protocol designed by the CDC. And that's why ever since last year, I've been saying the numbers are going to be higher and that we needed to revisit and to study this scientifically to arrive not only at the numbers, but also at how we can prevent another catastrophe like this happening in the future if another storm or earthquake hits. So that is the reason why there's such a big discrepancy.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a study ongoing with George Washington as well to zone in on those numbers as well.
But as of this morning, we just checked, the number, the official number on your website is still 64. If you know that to be wrong, why is that still the government number?
Because the way it's taken care when it got to 64, it was those related to the storm immediately after the storm. Once we realized that that was a faulty protocol, we called upon the Malkin Institute, George Washington, so that they could revise it and do it properly and do it scientifically. So it's taken time, no doubt about it.
But the number is still on your website.
Making sure that all of the data.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, you're saying that that number on your website, the official death toll, is not accurate.
Well, we've never expected that it was accurate. That's why we always said that it was going to be higher, and that we gave the task to George Washington University so that they can study it and that they could arrive at a number. But not only at a number. Listen, right now, we're rebuilding Puerto Rico. We're making sure that we learn from our mistakes. That's part of my job as a governor and as a scientist. And make sure that if another storm comes over here, we're prepared for it and we can respond much better on the healthcare front, and that it could be a model for the United States as well. I mean, there is no doubt that this has been the biggest catastrophe in the modern history of the United States, and we want to learn from it and we want to respond adequately from it. If we failed in certain areas, we want to make sure we understand what they were so that it's not a repeat moment again.
Look, I'm not trying to pour salt into the wound, but hurricane season starts today, and it does sound like you've failed. Yeah. You don't know how to calculate the accurate number of the death toll. And the death toll, if it is what Harvard says, so I know you're waiting for the George Washington University study, but that's not ready yet, okay? And hurricane season starts now. That number, 4,645, that is roughly the same as the number of fatalities on 9/11 and Katrina combined. So how can you say you're ready today for what's about to befall you this season?
Ma'am, we don't control the weather patterns. We don't control the hurricane season. We've been working as hard as humanly possible. We've been looking for the scientific mechanism so that it's not just accountability and counting, but also responding appropriately. So unfortunately, I saw you were talking about in the last piece about the energy grid. Unfortunately, it is a true fact that if another hurricane comes to Puerto Rico, even though we've lifted the energy grid, it takes time to actually modernize the energy grid. I am passing a bill so that we can transform the energy grid in Puerto Rico, make it more modern, make it more resilient. But really, what we're doing right now, come this hurricane season, is trying to mitigate the impact of another storm. Our path forward, looking towards the future, is that we can build stronger and better than before. But there is a reality. And I can stand here and say that everything's ready, that everything's looking peachy, or I can talk to you about the reality that we've been working hard for the past couple of months to evaluate all of the protocols to make sure that we're more resilient this time around, but recognizing that there are still limitations. This, again, make no mistake about it, this is the biggest devastation in the modern history of the United States. It has been marred with bureaucracy all over, and that has taken time. So,
yes, and just
but one thing is for sure, we are committed to rebuilding Puerto Rico stronger than before.
One last question about the bureaucracy. One of the things that the Harvard study found was that the government of Puerto Rico stopped sharing mortality data with the public in December of 2017. Our request for this data was also denied. Do you feel as though there are people in your cabinet or your government who have been stonewalling in terms of getting the accurate numbers out?
So yesterday I said, and I reiterate, if that was the case, there would be hell to pay, because I signed an executive order to open up the data for everybody. But it is very important that you realize that we also are accountable to an order of law and order system. And there is a law that prevents us from giving out certain confidential information about folks. So within that limitation, we have been giving information. We have been making sense of it. But we cannot give all of the confidential information. There is a Vital Statistics Bureau law. It's very clear on what we can and cannot give. And what we're doing is working with all of the stakeholders to make sure we make sense of all of the data so that the truth is known. Listen, whether it's 1 life, whether it's 500, whether it's 1,000 or 10,000, it is important for me. They're all important lives. And what I want to make sure is that from this one, we get some clarity, we get some closure, and then going towards the future, we're much more resilient, and that everybody, not only in Puerto Rico, but everywhere in the United States, we can be more prepared, better prepared for devastations of these magnitudes that are not going to stop. In fact, they're probably going to be increasing.
On that note, Governor Rosselló, thank you very much for being with us. We're thinking of you and the people on Puerto Rico, and please come back to us when you have your official updated number. Thank you so much for being on New Day.